Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Buckle up and bear with me if I start to lose my voice. This is kind of a long one. But anyways, here we go. Today we're talking about MK Ultra, the long-awaited by myself topic that everyone and their mother has talked about. Everyone's favorite secret experimentation, MK Ultra. We're gonna start with a basic rundown. Quick rundown before we dive deeper into it for those who don't know or might want a little refresher before really investing into this session. MK Ultra was a secret program that a section of the CIA ran in the 1950s through the early 1960s. The aim was to figure out if drugs could be used to control someone's mind and their behaviors. The main issue with this operation was that it was done on non-consenting individuals, which was considered adverse to everything the United States was founded on. At this time, pressures were mounting and people feared the Soviet Union, China, Korea, and communism as a platform for brain control. That's from NoFil 2019. To give an image of just how serious and harmful the experiments were, author and journalist Stephen Kinzer called the program essentially a continuation of work that began in Japanese and Nazi concentration camps. Tabor 2025. So now we're going to go into an in-depth analysis. There were several sub-projects underneath the main branching topic of mind control. Some test subjects were soliciting prostitutes. These women were working with the CIA for protection from legal trouble in the future and then given LSD to test the effects and timing on when is best to get information from a person. I feel like this is no shocker to anyone, but it was directly after intercourse. That's also from NoFil 2019. And some were meeting psychiatrists and told they would undergo narco interrogation. Forgive me if I say this person's last name wrong. Inoue and others, 1977. Let's go a little bit in a different direction for a moment. Something I'm guilty of is forgetting the relevance of women's role in history. Feels ridiculous because I am a woman, so I should, be a little bit more aware to it, especially as it comes to the absurdities that they observe and endure. Even as I read and write this, I skim too quickly over the women that were used in these experiments. They were not promised the chance to change their lives for their cooperation, only that if they couldn't, they would not be further punished. My opinions on sex work seem complicated, but they really aren't. It should be legalized so that it is safer for both parties. It removes the need for someone to be in charge of you, makes you kind of more your own boss, which in turn lowers the rate of abuse because they can report abuse without fear of legal ramifications. It would also keep younger women and children out of that line of work. The reasoning behind why I think it should be legalized is not because I think it's empowering, like we're sometimes led to believe. Supply and demand, as long as there's a demand for that industry, there will always be that industry. I just think it should be legalized so that the women don't have to keep getting abused worse and worse. I think it's almost as if I am so used to women's suffering, including my own, that I forget to register it. There is one resource I found that did really strike me though, because before I read it, I had foolishly thought that only the men were the victims of attempts for mind control. Esther Schreier was a patient at Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute in the 1960s. She had gone there to receive treatment for what we would recognize today as anxiety or postpartum depression. The hospital gave her electroshock therapy and endless drugs, 4 or 5 barbiturates and amphetamines at a time. She was pregnant with a man telling his story in the early parts of this resource, Lloyd Schreier. Today, he fights to be recognized as a victim of the MK Ultra program. Esther's family thought they were getting her the best treatment money could buy. Instead, she faced a man that was bought out by the CIA who believed in reprogramming a mind to heal it. Shepard et al. 2020. Another life lost. An army chemist named Frank Olson had his drink spiked with LSD by Gottlieb, head of the program, and others. Just 10 days after the incident, he fell from a 10-story building. The CIA ruled it a suicide. How convenient that it is that the program that took advantage of him was also able to determine his cause of death. If you would like to learn more about Olson, the resource I found was the first mention I had seen of his name. This resource also says that the Netflix series Wormwood goes over this aspect and more related to MK Ultra. That is from MK Ultra: Shadowy Details of the CIA's mind control operation in new documents, iflscience.com, 2025. As he was a chemist for the army involved with the proceedings of MKUltra in some way, I imagine there must have been some reasoning behind this course of action, not in the slightest as a means of justification, more so that he must have had access to so much information and could likely paint a more vivid understanding of what was ongoing. So much of what happened is a secret still. Nazi scientists strike again. Forgive me if any of this information is misinterpreted or generally wrong. I am doing my best based on the most extensive research I have done for one singular writing to date, but as always I state, any mistakes in research or writing remain my own. If you quote any of this information directly from my work, make sure that you note that every perspective differs slightly and that my interpretation is just one in a sea of many. That being said, I believe this information is trying to direct the correlation between Nazi scientists, CIA child abuse denial, Sweden, and Swedish policing. Light 2022. From this guide there are several resources. As I am not currently able to access and read every individual reference, I will give information based on those that I can access, but obviously understand that it won't be as complete as if you are able to go and look through all the resources. Harvey Weinstein and many others use false memory as a defense against sexual abuse, but especially as it stands towards incest. Did you know that this defense has some of its origins in the MKUltra project? Typical response to horrific experiences, I would imagine even more so the younger you are, is to banish them from memory. A lot of the women that were involved with MKUltra were sexually abused within the program. Some were consenting adults, allegedly, supposedly, but the promise of some form of freedom, aka no legal ramifications, does seem an incredible form of coercion. Martin Orne and many of his colleagues believe that traumatizing their test subjects would make it so that they were unable to recall the events in the future, but people can recall things after long periods of forgetting or from certain therapies. What better way to discredit any potential testimonies than to label them crazy and diminish their validity? Holtzman, 2020. This writing also mentions DARVO, which is Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim, and Offender, which is exactly aligned with what Freud did to secure his place in psychology. Freud's ideology of hysteria tries to explain hysteria as being induced from sexual abuse, especially at the hands of a relative. Gray, no date. With many of his peers being parents to his patients, the paper was not well received, and Freud pivoted to say that these memories or manifestations were merely the patient's fantasizing abuse. Holtzman, 2020. With the FMSF, False Memory Syndrome Foundation, doing the same thing to quiet victims at a much broader scale. Where we are now. Only partially through the resources just tied to this one infographic, we start with the unethical studies of the Nazis, then some of those scientists work with the CIA and continue unethical studies within the MKUltra. They don't create the foundation that helps people get away with abusing children, but they do build upon it. There is this constant denial of wrongdoing, many going so far as to say they simply do not remember the things done in the program, and with so many of the documents being destroyed, there's a significant lack of help to make sense of it all. The information I can find as a tie between the CIA, MKUltra, and Swedish police systems remains only speculative. Marty, 2006. Again, if you can read through all the references, I imagine it's more helpful, but for the time being, I am incapable of connecting that last piece of the puzzle definitively. The precursor to MKUltra and the reason why we just talked about the Nazis was called Operation Paperclip. Wiki contributors 2025. We won't get into it too far, but it was the event that got the Nazi scientists working with US government officials. The recruitment process was meant to avoid any active supporters, but many records were scrubbed because officials believed their intelligence to be crucial. Shum, 2014. Operation Paperclip led to the creation of several programs: Project Chatter, 1947, Project Bluebird, 1950, later renamed Project Artichoke, 1951, and of course Project MKUltra. Wiki contributors 2025. Chatter researched the effects of drugs and interrogation, recruitment, and possible treatments for depression. The program ended in 1953 when its experiments merged with MKUltra. Wiki contributors 2023. The primary goal of Project Artichoke, formerly Bluebird, Was mind control as used to determine whether an individual could be made to perform an attempted assassination? Wikipedia contributors 2020. Famous test subjects. Let's slightly adjust directions for a moment to maintain interest. I just described some absurd testing and we've only scratched the surface. I want to talk to you about some of the victims that you might recognize. The documentary Chaos: The Manson Murders, based on Tom O'Brien's book 2019, Chaos: Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, talks about the idea that Charles Manson was involved with MKUltra. The connection is credible, though there isn't definitive proof. Manson and his family frequented Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic in Trader 2025. This clinic was run by Louis Dolan. I probably said that wrong. West. The information on him is absurd. What I found from skimming, he wrote about communist brainwashing, was contracted for MKUltra's sub-project and received a grant of $20,800, potentially killed an elephant with LSD, and researched cults, allegedly to the point of Scientologists attempting to discredit him and get him fired. Allegedly. This is what he said. Wikipedia contributors 2025. Even if a fraction of the claims in the previous paragraph are true, that is just absurd. That paragraph itself could be its own 5-book series. Now, this is in no way, shape, or form saying that the project forced or created Manson as the man that he was. It is, however, just curious and interesting. A piece to dissect, basically. Another name you might recognize has much more credible ties to MKUltra, Ted Kaczynski. That's right, the Unabomber. Ted Kaczynski was a participant in Henry Murray's unethical experiments at Harvard University. For 3 years, Murray's team bullied, harassed, and psychologically broke down Kaczynski. Mather 2020. Between the years of 1959 and 1962, Henry Murray conducted damaging and purposefully abusive experiments on minors and undergraduate students. Wikipedia contributors 2019. Murray had credible ties to the CIA, working with Strategic Services, which was the predecessor to the CIA, in World War II. Not only that, but he did research on brainwashing and how well people could withstand interrogation. Mather 2020. Again, I specify these experiments likely did not create certain aspects within these individuals. However, they could have logically exacerbated a hatred for the government or other such traits. Do not misread this as justification. Simply put, should these allegations reign true, all we gain is a deeper understanding of the suffering behind the individual. Let's go back a little bit in this writing to dig deeper into something I touched on. I previously mentioned that the CIA did their drug tests on pregnant women. Well, specifically, I only mentioned one woman, Esther Skreier, Shepard et al. 2020. Her case was not the only one, though. While the experiments never intentionally set out to test on pregnant women, that does not mean it did not happen. Specifically, I am referencing the case of Lana Jean Ponting. Lana Jean Ponting was 16 and she was sent to the Allen for behavioral issues. So as she recounts, she was just a normal teenager. She underwent psychic driving, as did Esther, which was when they played a tape recording hundreds of times to manipulate the minds of patients using verbal cues. Medical records show they gave Ponting LSD, barbiturates, desoxin, which was a methamphetamine, and nitrous oxide gas, otherwise known as laughing gas. Ponting did not join the early lawsuits against US and Canada because she had little memory of everything she endured. Levinson, King, and Alana, 2022. I bore a son when I was at the Allen Memorial, and I got pregnant without ever knowing who the father was. Groupe des Rois des Consommateurs. Probably said that wrong. 2025. Research says Dr. Cameron did not know at the time he was receiving funding from the CIA, though most spectators do recognize, regardless of whether he knew or not where his funding came from, he should have known these experiments were not ethical. Coincidentally, where Cameron's work ended with the US intelligence in 1964, he died of a heart attack in 1967. Levinson, King, and Alana, 2025. So aside from whatever paper trail there may be, only the perspectives of colleagues and victims can lead to painting the full picture, but a piece will always be missing. Destruction of documents, but not of descriptions. Multiple times I have mentioned the documents that were destroyed, but I haven't clearly stated what survived. The agency made significant efforts to erase and hide the history of what was done, but they couldn't get to all of it or quiet every person. We have enough available to provide a truly unsettling depiction of what happened. Fannata 2024. A much more in-depth depiction of all that has been recovered is available. National Security Archive, 2024. Operation Midnight Climax. At the beginning of this writing and throughout, I have mentioned how some of the test subjects would meet prostitutes and then unsuspectingly be drugged. I plan to go more into depth by describing what it was. Operation Midnight Climax. It starts with that, but not only were the women taught how to interrogate the man afterwards, they were also given any number of different drugs to test with, including LSD. Sometimes victims were fed subliminal messaging to try to get them to attempt certain actions, for example, robbery, assault, assassination. Many CIA operatives also indulged in the drugs and prostitutes recreationally. Wikipedia contributors 2021. This part is more within the writing, but if you click on the writing and go to the resource or pull it up alongside this video, you're more than welcome to, but I basically just said follow along with this resource for a moment, and it's got a hyperlink. Reading into this, we're starting with the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, and how it uses China as a scapegoat to start fear surrounding brainwashing. Edward Hunter boasted that he was the first to discover the mind attack, write about brainwashing, and aside from the Chinese, the first to use the word in speech. This isn't remotely true, of course, but even more so because the Chinese description of brainwashing seems to stem from a religious aspect or philosophical aspect rather than an actual mind control attempt. Psychological applications, think Pavlov, though his experiments were not ethical either, were also studied before this man made his speech. Newitz 2024. Over time, brainwashing became a way to push away any nonconformist thinking, to the point that people became so scared of any other political ideation that even mentioning socialism turns you into a dirty communist. Brainwashing was the government's excuse for abuse under MKUltra. Only once the experiments came to light did the use of experiments and scientific understanding of brainwashing begin to dissipate. People feared secret society more than they feared communism for the time being. Why are the ethics of this so bad? I'm trying to not use curse words. Pretty much entirely around consent, but let's have a conversation about that. Investigators have been known to use different methods of gathering information from suspects. While some would look at this on the surface and see that giving someone drugs to relax them enough to let their guard down and accidentally give up information they had been hiding to be significantly less detrimental than sitting through torture, there are undeniable questionings of the ethics and how this might disturb an individual's rights. Inouye et al. 1977. Exactly that. I'll say, just because something has been done in a worse manner doesn't mean that the current order of operations isn't bad. Our acceptance of behavior shouldn't be judged in comparison with all others. Say that to say this. Each circumstance should be judged on an individual basis. This means that even when each issue is just one step on a stairway of despicable human behaviors towards the collection of all bad deeds, it still must be judged as one moment. If that moment continues, say for example, the CIA operative starts the movement, collects the prostitutes, drugs the men, and then afterwards also indulges in them, each one of those is an individual bad circumstance that when combined leads me to the conclusion that this man is depraved. He had just started the movement, it unknowingly went down the wrong route, he had plausible deniability. I would still say he holds some fault for beginning the experiment, but he doesn't see where it goes wrong, and he doesn't take advantage of the situation to indulge in his vices either. The collection of all a man's deeds does matter, certainly, but we don't judge a fish by its ability to climb, just like we shouldn't judge the situation based on how horribly it ranks in history. And I hope that you understand that when I say that, I'm not saying don't compare and contrast. I'm saying just because one thing is bad, one thing is a little less bad doesn't mean it's not bad anymore. Nonetheless, there have been countless unethical experiments in the history of the United States. I find it important to note this because I hear and read often how these aren't the values we were founding on. I see more evidence to say that a lot of it was. Maybe people only say that when it's white people at the forefront of the mistreatment. There have been loads of unethical experiments done on black and brown bodies for the sake of science. Think J. Marion Sims, the father of gynecology, Leo Stanley at San Quentin prison, which shit he was doing was eugenics. Nasty stuff. Richard P. Strong of Harvard University, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, John Charles Cutler in Guatemala, later on, who was involved with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which leads me to believe that this was something he just had no qualms over. This is the type of person he was. Radioactive iodine testing in multiple states, but specifically as it pertains to Alaskan natives. And seriously, the list seems never ending. Wikipedia contributors 2019a. I think we don't talk about how truly horrendous some of these experiments people have endured are/were. I think too easily things are brushed off because we gained some knowledge, but at what point do we take that at face value and realize that certain bodies are considered more expendable and that they can always justify the deaths of unknowing participants with the medal of scientific discovery? The people that underwent these experiments fully understood the ramifications of what might happen would they have continued, because a lot of sources say things along the lines that some of the test subjects knew what they were going through. We're talking widespread, not just MKUltra. But I think there's something missing there. To understand this better, I think we need to have the discussion of consent and what constitutes coercion or an abuse of consent through lack of information. Something easier for people to agree upon is Grape as depicted viscerally. Think of how a lot of people agree that Brock Turner is a deplorable being. I recognize often that people have harder times understanding the more so-called gray areas. Let's give some examples. True or false? A person's body belongs to themselves, therefore regardless of the belief of union under marriage, either party is allowed to not wish to engage in sexual activity, and if the other continues to pursue it, this can either be viewed as coercion, or if it goes further, without specified consent, it is marital rape. True. True or false? If a person has information that they are withholding from the other party because they know the person would not consent without the added information, think lying about having or not having a partner, lying about not having an STI, STD. There are other examples, I just can't currently come up with more. It is assault/rape. True. True or false? Coercion does not equal consent. If you have to beg, cry, plead, or convince someone by not letting up when they give mixed signals or say no, they did not consent. True. Enthusiastic and informed consent is the only way action should go about being performed. People should have full knowledge of the experiments that they are being subjected to or the activity they are engaging in. If they do not agree to do it because they want to, then the activity should not proceed. You could even apply this to something like understanding why you would want to do certain things, even if they aren't your favorite. Say you like football and you hate dance, but you have a daughter who's developing interest in dance. You should want to go not because you love dance, but because you care about your daughter, and your enthusiasm for that relationship should be stronger than your need to only ever do things that you 100% like. Think critically when applying this thought process to other concepts like that example. Researching. The last thing I would like to do is provide some of my starting points that helped me develop my thoughts and facts into a linear essay. Well, best as I can with my tangled yarn of a mind. These are not the end-all be-all for information on this topic. This is just where I started connecting dots. There are also more references attached to a lot of these people's comments. So there's an endless amount of research. Obviously, there's not literally, there's just a lot of research you can do on this topic, but research at your own discretion. I'm just going to say resource names because they are hyperlinked. Crazy Crossing 2012 helped direct me to some other readings. Deleted 2015 gave me a lot of information to work with in directing my research. Honestly, going through our Ask Historians MKUltra mentions was majorly beneficial in helping me know what sort of questions to ask, what to dive deeper into, and more. Another really good starting point for me was Lyle 2025. Furthermore, while this is public information, there are a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding it. I say conspiracy theories very lightly because while there are some genuinely absurd accusations made, there is often some truth either regarding human behavior or just plainly in the statements. Not all of them have genuine insight into what is happening in the world, but every single piece of writing has some bit of insight into the creator, and therefore the society that surrounds them. Due to the amount of information out there, you do have to be ever vigilant and check your sources to see how facts-based versus opinion-based they really are. I know that Reddit isn't the best or most accurate resource, but I like it as a starting point. Reddit gives access to a ton of different perspectives, which each leads you to more options, leading to a broader array of resources. If you do choose to do your own research on the topic, which I always encourage, because I love a good cycle of education, you teach me, I teach you sort of thing, please remember to ask questions, double check your information, and just generally be cautious when something seems like it might be trying to sell you a specific narrative. And I want to be careful how I phrase this to not be misunderstood. I know that correlated to what I said about us learning something from every writing, in turn that means there is a narrative to everything. My narrative is to learn and to teach and to encourage people to ask more questions, to learn more things, to build connections, and probably more that I'm forgetting. What I mean by pushing a narrative is anything that is trying to build on your fear to push hatred. Please understand that I'm guiding you to extrapolate this information, apply it across every background, and assume that spreading hate and fear is generally a bad thing. Please also understand that I don't mean things like hating pedophiles. We just had the conversation of consent, so we understand that the ethics of people like that are not there. Or hating broccoli or fearing a burning building. I mean this way of dividing us up through hatred. Men versus women, gay versus straight, black versus white, Jews versus Muslims versus Christians versus atheists, young versus old, left versus right. All these divisions don't truly make a difference from how we can practice kindness and community with each other. Once we learn that the way we want to live is entirely meant to be decided by ourselves and apply that perspective to each and every one of our neighbors, we learn that so much of the isms, racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, also includes phobias too. It's a lack in understanding rather than a lack in the people we hate's character. In summary, the government does messed up stuff all the time, make mistakes, probably exacerbate a lot of mental conditions, both through these sort of unethical trials as well as the lack of push for mental health services within our communities, and there's still a lot to learn because so much of history is destroyed or rewritten. There's a constant ignoring of ethics if it's in the pursuit of knowledge, especially more so when the people you test on are considered expendable within your society. People struggle to grasp the concept of consent unless it is painted in a violent enough depiction. I think ultimately what it always boils down to is a lack of empathy. So much of what we endure we do silently because we worry it won't be seen as bad enough to deserve validation and reassurance. Instead, we could recognize that there are things we're all struggling with and stop trying to compare suffering. There are advantages we have, there are advantages others have. None of this makes it impossible for us to suffer at the hands of those with more than enough to solve all of the world's issues. Anyways, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for reading, learning, watching. I hope you learn a million things today. If you'd like to take a minute to share your thoughts, I'm forever grateful for any feedback. I am learning this as I go, of course, and I will provide all my resources in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!